Apostle John was one of the first set of people Jesus called to be his disciples. He was one of the youngest disciples. One day, while he was with his brother James, taking care of their father's boat and fishing when Jesus called them, and they immediately left that they were doing to follow him. Now Jesus had a lot of disciples, but 12 were closer to him. Out of these 12, 3 were in his inner circle, and these were John, Peter, and James. Out of those 3, John was deemed the closest to Jesus. In John chapter 13, verse 23, he was referred to as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Beyond that, John went on to become one of the pillars of the early church. He wrote the Gospel of John and 3 epistles, which are 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John, and he also wrote the book of Revelations. Like many apostles of his time, he was persecuted. The persecution of the early church started with the killing of James by Herod, but it did not stop there. Not only the Jews persecuted them, but also the Gentiles persecuted the church when the gospel reached them. This was not surprising, because Jesus had said in Matthew chapter 10, verses 16 to 18, "I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Be on your guard against men. They will hand you over to the local councils and flog you in their synagogues. On my account you will be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles." The early church suffered this, and rulers and kings made use of the apostles, who were regarded as leaders of the church, as examples. Many of the apostles were persecuted and killed by the kings and people of that time. Some were beheaded, some were stoned to death, and some were crucified. Apostle John almost experienced the same fate. While he was persecuted, history states that he was not killed but lived till an old age before giving up the ghost. During the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian, he commanded that John should be killed by being thrown into boiling oil. The Romans were creative with the way they persecuted Christians, and this was another unusual way to kill a person. The problem Rome at that time had with Christianity was the teaching that there was only one God. Romans had a number of gods worshipped for different reasons, and to accept that there was only one God would bring an end to the worship of all the other gods. Also, no matter how much Christians were persecuted, the Christian faith kept spreading like wildfire in the Roman Empire. For the emperor, the way to try to stop this was to take a leader of the Christian faith and kill him in a creative way which no one would want to experience, to prevent more people from joining the early church. John was such a leader. He was a pillar of the church and was one of the few disciples who had experienced Jesus' time on earth and had walked closely with him. He was preaching the gospel, and just his existence would have drawn many to Christ. Not only did he know the gospel, he had experienced it. It had become a truth he could not deny, because he did not only hear the gospel but watched it happen with his eyes. His testimony of the life of Jesus when he was on earth, the death of Jesus, and the resurrection of Jesus were something he lived through. He was a witness to all that the gospel represented. This was why the Roman emperor was after him and wanted him dead. He believed that with his death he would be able to stop the spread of the gospel. So he was going to kill John for going against the Roman way of life, which involved idol worship and other vices Christians would not partake in, and also influencing others to do so. That way he could be punished for going against the Roman Empire. He was arrested and imprisoned till the day of his punishment. No one could have imagined the plans that Emperor Domitian had in mind for John. No one could have thought that it was something so strange and wicked. They had heard of people who were beheaded, heard of people who were crucified, but they were about to be surprised. Deciding to make a public spectacle of John to dissuade other people from the Christian faith, Emperor Domitian decided that Apostle John would be placed in a cauldron of boiling oil. This is quite similar to what happened to the 3 Hebrew men in Daniel who were thrown in an oven because they refused to bow down to the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had placed before them. Apostle John's faith was going through a difficult test. He could deny his faith and plead for his life, so he may escape such pain, or he could decide to be boiled in oil till death. The possibility of his survival is non-existent, but like the 3 Hebrew men, he was resolute and chose to hold on to his faith, even when faced with almost certain death. That moment must have been a difficult one for him. Many of the other followers of the Christian faith must have been there to see him. It was a decision to die. No human mind can think of a way to come out of boiling oil alive. However, despite the pain he knew he would face, even though he knew that he may not survive what he was faced with, John, the apostle, still chose not to deny his faith. In the presence of all those people, John chose to die rather than deny the faith and the gospel. The moment when he was placed in the cauldron must have been a quiet one, with every person watching anticipating his screams till his body could no longer take it, and finally his death, but surprisingly that did not happen. Just like God had rescued the 3 Hebrew boys, he did the same for Apostle John. There was no way for him to survive except through a miracle, and a miracle did happen for him. In that moment, John, rather than being boiled to death, was not hurt in any way. It seemed like he had not even been placed in the cauldron of boiling oil at all. His body had no marks of a burn and he felt no pain. It was a supernatural deliverance. Apostle John did not escape the cauldron of boiling oil with any help from man or by his power. He must have prepared his mind for death. It was only by the power of God that he was delivered. No one who saw him that day could ignore the miracle they had seen with their eyes. The emperor had failed to execute John. Instead of making other Christians afraid or deterring other people from joining the Christian faith, he made it more popular. They could clearly see that the God John had been speaking about did not abandon him but saved him even from the hands of the great emperor. Even Emperor Domitian could not deny that he had seen a miracle happen. It was obvious that God had rescued John from the plans of the emperor. This must have caused more people to desire to know more about God, whom John was willing to die for but who rescued him. While Emperor Domitian was trying to silence Christianity, he caused it to spread more. John's life proved that his God was real and rescued his own. After this event, Domitian realized that he could not harm John by doing anything physical to him. He had realized that God would rescue John from his plans, so he decided to make another plan against John. If he could not kill John, then at least he could put him in a place where John would find it difficult to preach the gospel. The goal, after all, was to prevent the spread of the Christian faith. He decided that his best option was to exile him to the Isle of Patmos, where he would be cut off from the church and would not be able to preach to as many people as he did when he was still free. John was left alone in the Isle of Patmos. His friends and family were far from him, and it must have been a difficult time for him. If he was in a general prison, he could have preached to the prisoners and made friends there, but in the Isle of Patmos, he was exiled alone. It must have been a difficult time for him, but instead of allowing that to get to him, it was there he received all that he wrote about in the book of Revelations. He made use of his time in solitude to focus on growing his relationship with God and fellowship with Him. This was why he received the book of Revelations. Needless to say, the book of Revelations was a very important part of the Bible, and it told the church what would happen in the future and what heaven and the throne room of God looked like. The Bible would have been incomplete without the book of Revelations. Instead of letting discouragement get to his heart after being exiled, he decided to use that time to fellowship with God. This should help us when we are also faced with times of discouragement. We should remember John, who was isolated but chose to keep his faith and focus instead on building his relationship with God. Perhaps you are in your own Isle of Patmos right now and you are experiencing a season of discouragement. Let his story encourage you. No matter how alone you feel, you are not alone. God is right there with you. Just like John, our lives are living epistles, and our stories will one day be a source of encouragement to many around us. Let the story of John remind you today that God is with you in whatever situation you are facing right now and encourages you to stand strong in the face of persecution. God sees you and He sees your sacrifice. You will get through it. What did you learn from the story of John today? Let us know in the comments section. Also, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more Bible edifying content. God bless you.